Hello, it is me, the ArcanaAngel, stepping into the universal energies, air, water, fire, and earth. And I am about to read you an adult bedtime story. Spirit led cornbread fed. I am in the South, and I just dusted off a oldie but a goodie. Readings for college writers because I like to read and I like to write. And I opened up to Don't Blame It on Human Nature by Hadley Cantrell. So I hope you enjoy the read on this cool, rainy night. Don't Blame It on Human Nature. Hadley Cantrell. 1. Living as we do in the midst of numerous conflicts and of vague forebodings that even more and greater conflicts lie ahead, we are apt to wonder if the situation has to be as it is. Hmm. Why is it that the only thing we can be sure about in tomorrow's paper is that the front page will continue the story of old frictions on the domestic or international scene, or headline some new conflicts that's on the horizon? Why must men get themselves embroiled? Is there something in human nature that makes all this trouble inevitable? 2. In critical times like these, the phrase human nature is battered about by columnists and politicians and commencement orators and spokesmen for special interest groups who either openly or implicitly have their own version of what human's nature is. Some see the reason for all our turmoil in the cussedness of human nature. Others assume that human nature is aggressive and pungent, thereby making conflicts and wars inevitable. Some think that man is by nature selfish and competitive, and that the best we can hope for is to establish some fair rules within which man's competitive instincts will be forced to operate. Others, more sentimentally inclined, argue that man is by nature kind and cooperative, but has been perverted by what they call modern civilization. Whatever the views expressed, the chances are they are rationalizations for perpetuating the system of ideas, institutions, or social and economic conditions that their exponents subscribe to. Occasionally, they are assumptions on the basis of which a goodwill reformer is urging a social change. And while being assailed by all these theories as to what human nature is, we are also likely to hear from the rostrum, the pulpit, the radio, a repetition of the theses that the physical sciences have far outstripped the social sciences. So that what we need today is more vigorous study of human nature to catch up with our knowledge of nature itself. What can a psychologist say to all of this? Or to put it more strongly, what should a psychologist say to all this in his joint role of psychologist and responsible citizen? The psychologist has a self appointed duty to try somehow to clarify the discussion of human nature because he knows that much of the talk is potentially dangerous. He knows that some proposals for action, some important policies are based on false premises concerning this thing called human nature and are therefore bound to turn into cruel illusions, bringing further conflicts and misery in their wake. On the other hand, some proposals promise more lasting progress because they are based on assumptions that square with what the psychologists and the social scientists know to be factually true. What then is the thing we call human nature? Let's look at it the way a psychologist would. He would point out, first of all, that human nature is an abstraction, one of thousands of abstractions upon men, unfortunately, operate. The psychologist would say that these abstractions, like all abstractions, can be understood only in relation to specific individual or individuals reacting in certain concrete situations. Take yourself, for instance. Presumably, you are a living example of human nature. What constitutes this you? If we stick to the naturalistic explanation and avoid any easy supernatural or mystical generalizations, we find that this you consists of physical organism endowed with a host of wonderful mechanisms and devices for adjusting to a certain part of your physical environment. We find too that you have certain basic desires and needs among them sexual desires, and a need for food and protection from the elements. Beyond a few such basic needs, most psychologists cannot yet go. They cannot subscribe to the existence of a whole host of instincts or a long list of needs which some men have conjured up as explanations for the very directions human activities take. In addition to the basic needs, you have a number of capabilities among them. The ability to use words and concepts, which distinguish you as a human being from all other living organisms. Biologists seem agreed that man as an organism is an emergent species endowed with certain capabilities which are qualitatively different from those of his nearest neighbors in the evolutionary scale and which make him unique. So, any analogies of human behavior to the behavior of other animals are highly suspect. In addition to these capacities and physical characteristics common to you and other human beings, you yourself have certain dispositions, certain temperamental characteristics, certain skills that are mainly biologically determined and that make you, as an individual, a unique personality, unlike all other people on the face of the earth unless you happen to be an identical twin. In addition to these biologically determined drivers and characteristics, you have certain tastes, certain standards, certain attitudes, certain beliefs, certain values, and identification. These are the things that give the direction to your behavior. These are the things that spell out what you regard as purpose, what you would consider as your own self interest. The all important point to remember is that these tastes and these standards and these attitudes and beliefs and identifications and values are things you have learned or that have been formed for good psychological reasons in the course of your life. They are not innate or inborn in the sense that your sex and temperament are inborn. You will know without being an ethnologist that taste, standards, and values vary from one culture to another. And if you have walked on the other side of the tracks, visited other parts of your city, mingled at all with people not in your own social class or your own customary group, you will also know that taste, standards, and identifications vary a great deal, even within a single culture. If human nature then means anything at all, it must include not only the innate biological characteristics that make you not only a human being, but a unique human being, but it must also include the direction of your individual or your group effort as learned or formed through the identifications you have made in your particular process of becoming a member of society. An important and necessary part of the psychologist's account of human motivation is found in the individual's identification with a specific group, for it is this that gives him his status, that builds in him his ego satisfaction. Thus, he strives to maintain or enhance his status. He strives to place himself as far up as he can that social hierarchy, those values have become his. If we could get firmly into our minds this distinction between those characteristics of man that are biologically determined and those directions of his activity that are learned according to the particular ideas of the particular social and economic groups with which he has lived. A great deal of the vagueness surrounding the phrase human nature would then certainly disappear. Examine, for instance, the statement that human nature can't be changed. Obviously, we cannot change the genetic characteristics of man, except perhaps experimentally. We cannot create people with three eyes. We cannot create a third sex. We cannot so change people that none of them has an IQ of less than 180. But this has nothing whatever to do with the potentiality of changing the direction of man's efforts. Whether a man is going to be competitive or cooperative, whether he's going to be a Catholic, a Protestant, a Muhammad, a atheist, whether he's going to be a Republican or a Democrat, such things are almost entirely determined by the particular set of conditions and values the man has learned. These identifiers, these modes of behavior, even in di- diametrically opposed to each other, all serve the same basic psychological function for the individual. We do not need to drag in any instinct of gregarious or any innate drive for status to account for man's activities. Group identifiers emerge inevitably because man lives, not in complete isolation, but with other men. Human nature, then, is anything but static and unchangeable. It can and does change with conditions. In fact, it is always changing. And not only is there a gradual change, but frequently There is the sudden emergence of new qualities and characteristics forms with a single individual or a group of individuals find themselves in a new set of conditions. Technological developments, for example, such as the steam engine, the airplane, the harnessing of atomic energy, at first provide some means to a specific end. Generally, however, they soon begin to affect and modify the ends themselves. Take, for example, the following case of the complete reversal of human nature, effected by a war created situation in a normal American boy who was not cruel or pungent by disposition. The case was reported to me by one of my Princeton students who knew the captain as he describes. Giving up the sport because, as he said, I didn't see much fun in killing. Once during, oh, I'm sorry. Taking, for example, the following case of a complete reversal of human nature, effected by a war created situation in a normal American boy who was not cruel or pungent by disposition. The case was reported to me by one of my Princeton students who knew the captain he describes. The captain was a Southerner in his mid 20s. He had been a rifle company commander on the Western Front. He was very well liked by both his fellow patients and his hospital personnel. His outstanding personality traits were modesty and the friendliness and kindliness of his disposition. As a boy, he had been fond of duck hunting, but had given up the sport because, as he said, I didn't see much fun in killing. Once, during a discussion of war experiences, he told the following story. He had commanded a company during the disastrous Battle of the Bulge, when the German army had broken through the American lines in an Ardennes forest. The captain found himself cut off from the rest of our forces and surrounded by the enemy. His situation was desperate. He had only about 40 men left, no food, little ammunition, and no idea where the American lines were. In addition to these difficulties, his company had a large number of German prisoners on hand. There was no way to get rid of the prisoners by sending them to a camp in the rear area. Guarding them with a depleted force was out of the question. Therefore, he determined to kill the prisoners. He and the sergeant took them out in the woods in small groups and shot them. Among the captain's group was a young boy only about 15 or 16 years old. The captain concluded his story with this remark. He was crying and begged me to save him, and I was kind of sorry I had to kill him. Hundreds of illustrations of this type could be given with respect not only to individuals, but to changed directions of group activities, such as occur in revolutionary situations. People are not gangsters or law abiding citizens, fascists or communists, a- antagonists or believers, good or bad, because of innate dispositions. People's actions do not take the direction they do because people are blessed or cursed with a certain kind of human nature. People's actions take the directions they do because a certain set of conditions has provided status, meaning, and satisfaction, or in critical times, because status, meaning, and satisfaction must be sought in new ways. Hence, conflicts between one individual and another, between one group and another, are inevitable. so long as conflicting identifications and conflicting purposes springing from social conditions continue to persist. These conflicts will never be resolved by compromises or attempts to change human nature or any individualistic basis. They will be solved finally only when social, economic, and political relationships are so arranged that an individual, while retaining his own purposes, his own status, and his own ego strivings, can identify these with the larger, all inclusive goals of the whole society. Personal goals must become socially valuable goals, and social goals must become personally valuable. It should be stressed that this idea of a common purpose does not mean a leveling off of taste, interest, or performance with respect to the inherent and unique capacities and temperamental characteristics of the individual. For these differences in abilities and temperament will determine the specific role an individual can fruitfully play within his group and within the larger interest of society. Someone is sure to ask the psychologist why. If he thinks knows so much about human nature, can he do something about it? Why must he endure unending conflict? Why can't the social psychologist tell people, especially those in power, what should be done? Unfortunately, the psychologist knows that many people have so identified themselves with their own group standards that they would literally rather die than give up their identificators. Hence, we have conflicts between those human beings who identify themselves with capital and those who identify themselves with labor, between those who have become identified as Arabs and those who have become identified as Jews, because those who call themselves modern and those who call themselves Hindus. In his address to Princeton's bicentennial, President Truman said that as we gain increasing understanding of men comparable to our increasing understanding of matter, we shall develop with God's grace the ability of nations to work together and live together in lasting peace. But the psychologist must point out that since an individual is largely what he has identified himself with, and since his identificators define his purpose, no amount of purely intellectual understanding is enough to bring about any change in direction of his activities. The sort of understanding that changes purpose is one that has a person somehow gets below the neck. In casually patterned societies, such as ours is today, the psychologists and the social scientists are apt to be laughed off by the man of affairs as impractical and story eyed dreamers. We need not argue the claim that the physical scientists are ahead of the social scientists. It is difficult to know what measuring rod one must use. It might, however, be pointed out that the problems of man and his relationships are probably even more complex than the problems of nuclear physics and not so amenable to controlled experimentation. But the main point is that we already know a great deal more about man and his social relationships than most people in our casually patterned society are willing to use. And we also know why people aren't willing to pay attention to scientists who deal with people. Apparently, we have to wait until people learn the hard way that real democracy and real world peace can come about only when human beings recognize their common purposes as human beings. Furthermore, they must see that the dignity and uniqueness of every individual, pathological cases aside, can be preserved and enhanced without in any way running head on into the common purposes of all men. We can say then that there is nothing fixed or static or immutable about human nature. We can say that there is no one single accurate characterization of it. We can say that it is fluid, constantly changing, and occasionally under a new set of conditions, it exhibits new and hereafter undreamed of possibilities. When conditions are changed, human nature is changed. Human nature, as it characterizes any group at any given time, is what it is because of the conditions under which the individuals in that group have matured. And the only way to bring about the human nature we want is to plan scientifically the kind of social and economic environment offering the best conditions for the development of human nature in the direction we would specify, a direction that spells freedom from group conflict and freedom for personal development. Dun, dun, dun. That was deep, deeper than I imagined. A couple of I think it's three. It's broke down evaluation and discussion points. Some readers will say paragraph 9 minimizes the number and an influence of our instincts. If you agree, point out certain acts by individuals and by groups that have tended to occur all through history and relate these actions to our instincts. Number 2, describe instinctive and social influences that have led to the following. A, the cheating that goes on in your college. B, the attitude of the students towards winning an athletic contest by illegal means. C, the treatment that society gives to all mentally retarded, the poor, and the criminal. And D, the attitude that you have towards the possibilities of world peace. Number 3, comment on the following. A, boys will be boys. And B, man is by nature sinful. Hope you enjoyed that reading of adult bedtime stories read by me, the Arcana Angel. I read for you Don't Blame It on Human Nature by Hadley Cantrell. And till next time, I hope I gave you something that helped you to sleep better. Sweet dreams. Confirmation rules the nation. Subscribe, like, and connect. Namaste.